The number one thing is curiosity. They took the call for some reason. You got to discover why. Like, you're not here to tell them something. You're here to learn from them during that sales process is the most critical thing that I've been able to learn over time.
Thank you so much, team listeners, for joining us on yet another episode of the Go-to-Market Lab, a podcast that I feel like the mission is dedicated to the founders and the revenue leaders for those who are in the B2B tech startup game, who are at the journey, whether it's pre-seed to Series C, and trying to understand the go-to-market recipe, that science and the art of trying to figure out what works and what doesn't at each stage. Our mission in this podcast is really to make sure that everybody walks away with tangible value of what they could apply on a day-to-day basis that maybe a GPT can't tell you. I'm super excited for my guest today, the CEO of Nudge Security. And I want to let him tell his story here on how the company came to be, because it's a really interesting technology that is incredibly relevant for where we are with our AI agentic world. Let's call it that much. Russ, why don't you give the listeners just a little bit about yourself and how you came to be the CEO and co-founder of Nudge Security?
Yeah, happy to. And I'll keep it quick because there's a lot of details that I can probably overlook as it relates to this audience. But this is the third cybersecurity startup I've been a part of. My last one was acquired by AT&T. And one of the very interesting pieces that they did there is they put the leadership team from my last company in charge of the whole MSSP business at AT&T. And during that experience, what I observed time and time again is we're shipping out EDR agents and SASE products and by the boatload, but we kept on coming up with the same problems, which is as soon as employees start using the internet, all perimeter-based and asset-based controls just start to fall apart. And so kind of with that sort of key insight, we went out into the market and we recognized that there is an evolution in what we need to be concerned about in terms of protecting our organizations. And that's really all of those day-to-day human decisions that our employees make as they get their job done. And when we put concrete examples to that, that could be as simple as choosing to, upload a PowerPoint presentation to OpenAI to get revisions, which is obviously a modern example, or it could be as simple as like hooking up Airtable into Salesforce or trying a new trial of some marketing tool. All of those incremental decisions build into a substantial risk factor for organizations. So we built Nudge to address that and help people address that risk that comes from that workforce edge. How do we get visibility into all those day-to-day decisions? And then how do we put scalable governance and controls in order to actually start directing and changing the behavior of employees to reduce that risk as it relates to third-party risk management, identity security, data security across your organization?
There's a lot there. I have a million questions I'm going to ask to unpack that here, which is related to the go-to-market journey. Before we get into that, Russ, give us a little bit more as to what your background was before you got into your last company, which sold. Do you have a technical background? You come up in sales. Just a little bit of what Russ was like, what he was doing 10 years ago to kind of help us understand how you came to be now.
Absolutely. In terms of that sort of deep historical dive, I started as an engineer at a company called Fortify Software in the application security space. I was one of those engineers that never knew when to shut up and to stop sharing my opinions. And quickly I got, promoted into group lead architect, and then eventually was running products for that organization. Made the transition to HP, which acquired that first company, and then went off with our chief product officer and CTO to a company called Alien Vault. Alien Vault was a very different journey where we were not evangelizing an emerging market, but rather taking technology and bringing it down to the commercial mid-market. And there I developed a very deep appreciation while running products on the alignment between the sales organization and the product side of the house. And so that really gave me a deep dive into what we had to do as product people in order to make our product more consumable for the sales organization, for the marketing organization. And then ultimately that drove a deep love for transactional high volume business and the sort of self-service models that we now employ at Nudge.
Let's give the listeners a little bit of background as so they have perspective as you're commenting on where Nudge is right now in terms of the journey of a company. What series are you at? Kind of where would you mark your journey in terms of a product market fit, of scale, of growth, et cetera, just so that the listeners can at least relate to what you've been through and what you're currently going now as you provide your comments today.
So we are still an early stage company. So we're still a seed stage company. With that said, these things mean different things than they once did. We raised a decent amount of capital in order to actually develop the foundation for our business. We are above 150 paying customers. We're growing at about 200% year over year. And we are at a place where we've been in the market for about 3 years. And so got some good experience in terms of, kind of maintaining that growth through the last few years.
So that's interesting. The last podcast that I did, Russ, was a quick update on kind of state of the state of the VC world and where a company is specifically and those looking to raise Series A. And the thing that the research told me that I reported in that podcast, Russ, was that, it used to be that we had free cash that maybe showing 500, 700K of ARR, like, yep, I'm good. I can go get secure my Series A. And now that's not the case. The word on the street and what I reported on was that, whatever that number is, it needs to be meaningful. Let's just say plus or minus 2 million, really showing some sort of consistent revenue, which really means at the end of the day, you should be prepared in your seed stage to have 3 years plus or minus a run rate, right? Before you feel like you need to move on. Now, it sounds like you already planned for that. That's what the research has said. But what is your comment on kind of living it every day and what you see?
I think your comments are very accurate in terms of the state of the market today, which is, frankly, you can get to a lot higher scale than you ever could in the past with some of the technologies and off the shelf opportunities that are out there. What we've seen is in what I've experienced is certainly when you're going at that Series A stage, people are expecting something close to a repeatable sales motion, which was often reserved for kind of that Series B of like, okay, now I'm going to grow something that we've figured out. So that sort of like, more practical where you are as a company milestone has shifted a little bit. It's still somewhere in between the classic, like I've got product market fit and now I want to figure out the sort of go to market motion, which was the classic Series A milestone. Now we were a little bit past that in terms of like, I've got something kind of repeatable during my seed stage. I've got to a reasonable amount of revenue volume. Now I want to really mature that before I kind of drive towards that Series B milestone of, okay, now I got some money that I can throw on the fire and like really scale this out. And so those things are definitely up in the air and it does change from firm to firm. But I do believe that your sort of comments on that are correct, which is you do need a little bit more revenue volume in order for people to kind of take the revenue that you have been able to close more seriously as you kind of scale for that Series A.
Listeners, I wasn't technically looking for a softball to I told you so, but I told you so. So, there's Russ to validate that point. Russ, let's go back into Nudge's journey because for the listeners out there, I'll tell you guys a story. So when Russell and I met, the premise was we were connected by a common contact and I was asking a lot of questions around, okay, I need to, I'm shifting and I really want to focus on helping start early seed B2B tech startups. Connect me with a founder you feel like is doing this right at these early stages, and enters Russ. We had a really great conversation. What really kind of landed with me different than the 10 other people that I talked with is Russ's approach at Nudge I would say at its lightest, you did a lot of go to market, quote unquote, testing at the early stage and spent a significant amount of time and investment doing it that normally wouldn't be done, again, per this old model in the later stage. So Russ, kind of talk us through, let's rewind the clock into, sounds like so in the market, you're 3 years. So let's say 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. What was the kind of first thing you're launching this company? What was the first thing that you were doing in that journey to product market fit at that stage?
The piece that really informed my journey at Nudge was that experience that I had at Alien Vault, which was that previous company. And what I found is if you are maturing a product independent of a sales motion, you end up with a gap between those two that sometimes can take a couple of years to reconcile. And so with Nudge, we really focused on maturing the product market fit, but also alongside that, the product market sales fit at a similar rate. And so even before we launched a product into the market, we were running ads. And we're doing that to gather input in terms of what kind of audience can we reach, who's engaging in these ads, who's actually, going so far as registering for requests for early access. And a lot of people kind of have this hang up of like, well, if I put my brand out there and there's nothing to deliver, then I'm just going to, kind of alienate a lot of potential customers and like get myself into a bad spot. The reality is these eyeballs are there, and perhaps I did alienate a few, but the reality is we also got the names and some people who are really engaged in the product and engaged to the point where they're willing to put their name down before, I had much more than a landing page. And so that's just an example of kind of that early investment we made in the go-to-market alongside the product as we were doing market exploration, figuring out, okay, I know there's a problem. I know there's an audience. I've talked to a number of people, but can I reach other people that are like that through traditional digital marketing channels and effectively get them to engage with me with the messaging out there? And that led to a lot of refinement in terms of how we talked about the problem, who we were focusing on, what channels we used to actually engage that prospective audience. And that was incredibly informative as it kind of rolled into that early launch, those early customers, and then sort of the early scaling as we started to build out that sales team and that demand generation engine alongside the product.
Just it sounds a little bit crazy to me because so I'm imagining this in ad or edit here. So you got a land, you don't even have a website, you got a landing page. A landing page that says what Russ like product coming and it kind of has high level information as to what it does and what problems it's solving.
So that's the interesting balance that you get to drive. And perhaps we didn't do it perfectly, but like, up to everybody to experiment in their own right. We did ads, and I think our earliest ads were around shadow IT. So how do you discover shadow IT? And then we put you on a landing page, and it would be similar to any landing page you might have for a product offering, which is like, here are the three sort of value propositions. Here's roughly how it's going to work. And then instead of a try it now button, or we just had a registration form of like, register for interest, we'll call you back.
You didn't even say product's not ready. You just said, like, sign up your name, we'll send you some info. That's it.
The same as any other landing page, right? And to be fair, there were a number of customers who, when we got them on the phone, it's like, hey, early stage company, here's demos of what we're working on. Would you like us to keep you in the loop? And there were a few people who raised their hands. There was a couple who kind of, hey, not today. Like, I don't have time for this. But like, it was all very polite and congenial. So it wasn't a horrible experience, but we got a lot of data in terms of like impressions, click through rates, engagements, ran a few different campaigns, understood where we could sort of, focus our initial launch as a result of that sort of early discovery. But all of that was very much in a data gathering context. However, we're using more traditional marketing techniques in order to gather that data as well, alongside the sort of more anecdotal, interviews that went along with that.
Okay, so a common question, Russ, that I get from founders that I work with is, okay, what budget are we talking here for ads? And again, knowing that in this case, you weren't spending that budget with the case of getting leads, you're really trying to validate product market fit. But one thing that I see quite often is that, let's say, we'll run an experiment or a test, and we'll be 4 weeks in and kind of, just a little bit, $500 in. It's like, oh, it's not working. Let's go. Let's move on to the next thing. So give us a sense of, what did you spend on these ads? How long did you let them run for before you said, yeah, this test is valid and I feel like I'm moving on?
I apologize. This was a few years ago at this point, so exact numbers are going to be a little bit far from my recollection. My ballpark, I would say, is I think we probably spent about $10,000 total across, a few tranches of ads. I think most campaigns we put $1,000 or $2,000 into. Ultimately, however, when you kind of look at those dollars spent, you know, we had raised some seed money, so we were on borrowed time. The countdown clocks, the next round was already on. But even with that said, $10,000 compared with any of my developer salaries, if I can be more effective in targeting what they're going to actually spend the next 3 months, 6 months of their life on, that's incredible return on investment because we can start to cross off angles where we know that we can't actually capture the demand that ultimately we're going to want to deliver on and sell to. With all of that said, though, there is also some channel experimentation that can lead to some, challenges. A lot of our early ads were on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's good for impressions, but not great for click through. And I don't know, maybe you can give me some kind of points to that. But similarly, other areas that were just kind of emerging at that point, Reddit was really starting to launch their advertising business. That helped give us some good signal. There was some more traditional, Google AdWords that also added to that. Google, frankly, is a great place for high volume impressions and in reasonable click throughs for relatively low cost. And at least again at that time, was easy to get to a place where we could actually get some meaningful data. In terms of timeline, this was about a 2 to 3 month period that we kind of ran those test campaigns in order to get that initial data.
What would you say that's super helpful? So I appreciate you giving the listeners that context, a little bit of that behind the scenes look. Now, here's the big question. Who was running, were you the person who were using the go-to-market tools and setting up those campaigns, et cetera? Did you have a firm do that, a consultant do that, a marketer do that?
To be fair, perhaps a firm might have done a more effective job. What I would say is most of these platforms are relatively self-service. We have a wonderful woman who's running product marketing now, running product for us at this point in time. But at that point, she was running product marketing. Frankly, that was the first hire that we actually made at the company, the two founders, then the woman who now runs products, but at the time, product marketing. That positioning was key for us as we get out there. How can we actually effectively talk about what we are trying to build, what our vision is, what we're trying to deliver? She ran a number of those campaigns and ads, and I think her credit card was still in there until about a few months ago when we had to up the limits. But she really kicked that off. Obviously, all of us were involved, a lot of input going into it, but I think she built out the subject matter expertise of how do I get LinkedIn to show something.
And you had just mentioned this, so I'm going to bring it back to this. And so at this point, again, listeners, the goal is not to generate this point of kind of pipeline. The goal was to get PMF, product market fit, not product sales fit. Can you unpack for our audience, Russ, like tell me what in your words is really the difference between the two in terms of the outcomes and as well what are the KPIs that you're watching in either case?
And to be clear, and I just want to clarify one thing, is in terms of these campaigns, I would really put these more in that bucket of product market sales fit of like, can we actually, create the demand for the problem we're solving, which is different than can we create a product that solves the problem. Between those two, that sort of product market fit, is very much there is an ICP out there. We've identified that ICP. We know what their sort of daily drivers are, their pains, gains, all the sort of traditional product marketing and product management functions, and we can deliver a product that alleviates those pains and deliver some of those gains. From a product market sales fit, is do we have a go-to-market motion that can effectively reach those prospects, can effectively communicate the value of our product, to engage them far enough so that they either want to try the product or engage with us further? And then do we have a sales experience that allows us to deliver and transact? It's really that can I build a car, and then can I build a network of car dealerships that can actually distribute the the cars that I'm building out in Detroit? And those are two critical pieces to scale.
So I think that's a good definition to put out there because I think to your point, those get confused and maybe pulled together in the same motion where those are different experiences. You could run the campaigns that you had, but to your point, if you had picked the wrong ICP or are solving a problem that isn't worth it isn't worth an ICP to put that won't put out money for, hence or not a right ICP, it's not going to make sense. Like everything is going to fail at that point. So you had already done that initial work.
Or the ICP exists out there, but there's only 50 of them in the United States, right? Like that can happen easily if you're working with, Fortune 50 companies, right? There's challenges that kind of come in on both those sides if you don't kind of balance the effort across those two buckets.
So you're a couple years. So let's move along the storybook here. So you're a couple years down the line. If you would say, "Gosh, I wish I had done hindsight 2020. I wish I had done this differently. Looking back, I wish I knew this then." Anything that you would also add to the list of this is my recommendation to you if you're listening and you're just launching what you should be focusing or not focusing your time on as the CEO and leader at this company?
It's always hard to reflect on things that you could have, would have done, right? The two things that I think are market dynamics that I now have a deeper appreciation of is the role of the channel in the modern market. So one of the areas, and again, it's strange for a seed stage company to be talking about channel, but the reality is with the number, in particular, cybersecurity companies that are out there, we've seen a shift in the role that channel plays, not just sort of like paper pushers as might have been sort of trivialized in the past, but more importantly, now what we're seeing them is the screening function of, cybersecurity teams, which is I have a problem, trusted channel partner, go find me 3 candidates that might solve this problem, and then let's go run a sales cycle as a result of that. And that's just a sort of optimization of time use. We don't have the time we once had to like go figure out of the 30 players in this space, because in the past it used to be 3 players in this space, right? So that volume comes with this additional filter. So in that investment in building the relationships with the sort of, regional reps and the sort of technical resources in those channel organizations really pays off in the long run. That was certainly an area where, earlier investment I think could have been well warranted. And it's a very different sort of perception of channel than I had in prior lives where really it was more about demand fulfillment, where now it's really about sort of that screening function that is critical for early stage companies to be involved in.
In the way that I describe it in my experience, and I've done channels, where there's different types of partners. So whether they're a channel partner or they're, let's say, an influencer or alliance partner. So this is your Deloittes of the world who are doing consultative engagement and really are maybe not even taking points, but they're a very strong advisory influence position to your stakeholder. But a piece of that was a conflict often in my past life, Russ, was that the businesses I were in were going direct and through channel. And so channel conflict was a big piece that was really hard to reconcile, not only as a sales leader, but as a rep of do I take this direct, et cetera. So are you guys doing 100% channel? Have you split that? Have you had this kind of discussion? Because at the end of the day, that if you go 100%, which is obviously what channel loves, your destiny is in somebody else's hands. I'm curious how you guys thought through that process and making decision to add in a channel piece to your go-to-market motion.
Yeah, largely I would say that is not a solved problem and nudge yet. Ultimately, what my experience has been with the channel is you got to make comp neutral across delivery. And so if I'm comping my salesperson, I can't have a big shift if they're going through a channel versus going direct, because that's ultimately what creates that incentive conflict. So that is fundamental to what we do, but at the same time, we still do have a sizable amount of direct business, and I would say channels is certainly emerging in terms of how we fulfill. But very much, that underlying piece is just making sure your sales guys don't care. If your sales guys don't care, then the rest of the team usually kind of resolves that over time.
Yeah, well, clearly Salesforce is listening because if you have followed, they just released their version of, if you will, a CRM for a sales motion, sales system for the partner channel, which really is about normalizing incentives and be able to manage deals as if your partners were literally a sales rep in your organization. So there's transparency and kind of all are you essentially there's no incentives that are aligned in a separate way, right? They kind of become kind of a part of your extension, so to speak. And so took them a long time to do that, but that was just their last news wire. So it's interesting. So clearly they were listening to your advice before this podcast. All right. So let's talk about today. I think, the challenges that my clients face in a day to day, that they're a few steps behind you and they're still trying to get their footing. They're still trying to get their first set of customers. They're still trying to get some recognition, trying to get some predictable pipeline, still very much working warm intros as much as they can, et cetera. But part of the challenge today that I know I face in helping them from the marketing outbound and trying to fill the lead funnel is that channels are very the marketing campaigns are very noisy right now. So LinkedIn to me feels very much like an Instagram now and a face. There's just so much on there. Reddit, I think, is still an untapped piece in my professional opinion. But man, are people getting a lot of emails with AI SDRs? It's just, it's not only just emails, but fairly, well formed personalized emails that you could argue that I think I'm trying to detect which ones have a pretty good bar now, which ones are AI formatted and which ones are not. But there's just a lot of stuff. So as you mentioned earlier, 3 years ago, I think you were my impression would be you were ahead of the curve of discovering now what the market is discovered, which I don't have to have a full marketing team and SDR of all these tools. But now the channels are flooded. So now it's really hard to get cold outbound. From your perspective, I'll just ask a simple question. What is quote unquote working right now in terms of if you are giving advice to a founder who is just still at those earlier you 2 years ago, knowing what you know, what's working and not in your day to day, what would kind of guide them to think about and to consider?
Really challenging to kind of rise above the noise these days. The two things that I think have been very effective, and I can't say that these were necessarily 100% strategic, but they've paid off, is first and foremost, when we created our brand, we were very cognizant in terms of what kind of relationship we wanted to develop with the market. And first and foremost, and even from the day zero, before we were doing anything else, we were posting long form content on blogs that was very educational oriented. So very much about establishing a trust relationship with us and our potential prospect, where we were delivering some value, even if it was just in the form of like better educating something about an emerging trend or a topic, etc. We've continued that over the course of 3 years. We now have literally a few hundred blog posts, all of them a few pages long of rich content. The way that's paid off in non-intuitive ways is as more people are leveraging LLMs for their initial discovery, there's a reward that LLMs have provided for actually in-depth long-form content. And so what we actually now find is one of the top referrers to our website is OpenAI, Perplexity, some of these sort of, more emergent discovery channels, that has been really beneficial for us. But ultimately, I think it still goes back to that same fundamental thesis, which is if you're establishing an educational relationship with whatever that prospect in the market is, ultimately, I do believe that pays off in the long term. And so when we think about some of these other channels, and you sort of remarked on, LinkedIn being noisy, absolutely is, but there's still a place for actually, adding to the conversation. And there's still a place for actually adding to sort of the community that you may be a part of, and doing so in a form that is first and foremost educational, and then second, promoting your brand, whether that's directly or indirectly. Similar in forums like Reddit, we've got great reception for our company within Reddit, even though we're a dirty vendor or whatever the hashtag is they use there. But you really need that community development mindset as you kind of think about these channels and how you add to the conversation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I'm still so fascinated by the smart moves that you made early on in the decisions, because although it was only 3 months, in my mind, it doesn't sound like that long, but that's a long time whenever you're working off borrowed time and borrowed money. And you know that at some point you need to go create revenue so that you have everything that you have now and preparing for your next part of your journey. But it's hard to do those actions that are not going to pay off right then in those early days. You knew that you were developing that brand. You knew that you were developing that relationship and you providing value assets. And I think for a lot of companies, that is something where at the startup size, like you just want to go straight to revenue, 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 revenue. You're trying to sell, 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 and not time to nurture that just your brand at the end of the day. To me, what you were established back then was really your brand that knows what you're talking about. And you want to be a place that is trusted because of that knowledge. And hence you're giving away valuable information. And then the piece that the way you said it to me resonates, which is you're creating content, number one, to be of value, not to push your brand. And second of that objective is to make people aware of your company and how you solve those problems. Because I think that there's some companies that believe they're putting out content and they're putting out lots of content. And to your comment now, obviously it's not that hard to create long form right now, given the editors, but it all sounds like a commercial when you go through it. Like I'm not able to take it and apply it.
It becomes really challenging, and I do hold a little bit of a critical eye towards some of these, like, syndicated newsletters, which have gone from, "Okay, I'll read the article on your headline because there's gonna be something of value for me there," to now it's like, this is a thinly veiled advertisement, like a long form advertisement for some company, right? And that has shifted, and do you think that there's probably gonna be a pendulum swing back at some point in time? But ultimately, if your readers are listening, or excuse me, the prospects are reading those articles and they're getting halfway through and they're not saying, "Oh, now I know more about this subject," but rather I've just scrolled past 4 like baited links to get to your website. Like there's a very different experience that comes to pass, and I think different results that actually that get produced as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It still goes down. So we're doing things for the right reason, the money will come, right? Uh,
Well, it can't be too altruistic. My investors will start getting mad at me.
yeah, yeah. And we know we're common friends with those investors are. So I won't say any more to that. All right, Russ. So let's to try to kind of round out here our remaining time in this segment. You fair to say, so your last company sold. This is the first company though that you're CEO sitting in this seat. Fair.
That's right. Yeah, a whole lot more problems.
I'd love to have you share if you're open to being vulnerable, so to speak, little Brene Brown plug in there. If you're open to being vulnerable and coming into this seat, what you felt like was the things that you did before this role that best prepared you for this job that you're doing every day that has really served you well. Because I personally believe, I don't know if you listen to podcast founders, I've listened to a ton of those episodes where he basically dissects biographies and geeks out over each person who are amazing people in society for an hour, solid hour, maybe even multiple episodes. But what he really goes back to is he talks about what made them who they were before they hit the news. And those I think are fascinating stories where once you hear that, now you get, okay, this is why they had all these successes. It wasn't made in the highlight reel, it was made in the time before. So, what do you feel like you did before this role that really has paid off in spades now?
So the areas that I always appreciated, and this goes back to when I was an engineer to running products or whatever the sort of function I had, is the closer you can get to that customer, the closer you can get to that sales process, that just pays off in spades. And even as an engineer, whenever I dealt with a customer, I would come back with like 4 new ideas of how I could improve our product for their life and their day-to-day pains. Similarly, as a product manager, like there's a very different experience that I had when I sat down with a customer versus when I sat down during a sales cycle and sort of understood the sort of guarded, optimism that you might have with a prospect versus the sort of, you know, reality of their day-to-day use, and how you sort of balance your efforts in terms of product development to better, match the value delivery with the initial perception, but then also that value delivery with the ongoing use of the product. And every single time that I sat down with the front half of the company when I was in the product role, or with a customer base, always appreciated the lessons learned from that. And then looking back on that, that's probably the number one thing that sort of made me feel equipped to take on the role of CEO, is having a basic understanding of sort of what it takes in order to have an effective go-to-market team, but then also what it takes to have a long-term, value delivering product experience for that customer. Really having a good understanding across both of those, give me the confidence to kind of take the lead. But ultimately, I think that has been very informative in terms of the decisions we've made here in that.
And like you, Russ, I have a sales background, not a technical background. So I would say it to me, what I heard you say even more plainly is that before this role, you had an experience of what it was like to sell, what it was like to be able to relate to the, and I would say sales in this case is being able to understand a customer's pain and be able to, through product and interactions and demos and conversations, be able to come to a common understanding that what you have to offer solves for that customer's pain or the goals they're trying to meet. And in my mind, that is what I define as sales. So I would say to me that that was an experience you had before coming into the seat.
Absolutely, and it was much better articulated than I I just rambled about. But certainly, new product introduction, particularly as a product manager, I was on every single sales call as we launched, new paid features or capabilities, sitting alongside that sort of foundational salesperson, always kind of like anointed one person. But like the pain that you go through when you have sat there and sort of like, I just talked with 50 people. This is the product that they told me they needed. Now I'm selling it to somebody who wasn't part of that sort of initial cohort. Like there's such a different gap that you have. And like back when I was a young engineer, that was completely lost on me in terms of what it took to actually explain the value, build that trust, and get to the place where they're willing to kind of either put money on the line or in some cases put their careers on the line in order to kind of take that leap and invest in a new company. And that is continuously, something that I take seriously as we sign on new customers. They're doing a lot of trust with our brand and our company and our product in order to kind of move forward with us. And we need to earn that trust, not only during that sales experience, but the ongoing engagement with that customer going forward.
And so the last question I'll ask you is really what we're dancing on is you were, in the phase of founder-led sales, the founder has to be able to sell. Now, for those folks on the line who are founders or co-founders that weren't able to have that experience of being able to ride shotgun into talking to the customers along the way, what advice would you give them in being able to improve how they're able to message, how they're able to present, how they're able to have conversations, et cetera?
I think probably one of the best things that I always learn from is I take cold calls. I respond to marketing emails, and every single time I have a salesperson on the other side of the call, I try to learn and understand what they're doing as they're interacting with me. And some are really good, and other companies like a large e-signature companies, like I talked to three people before I actually talked to somebody who could like answer my questions and like transact a 5K deal of a product I needed, right? And like all of those experiences, I think allow you to kind of not for the context of your product, but like just in the context of what it means to be a buyer in B2B SaaS. Take advantage of those experiences. And they seem like an annoyance, but ultimately you learn a whole lot about like what makes you feel good and what makes you put off. And I think those are great ways to kind of evolve your ability to not only communicate the value that you're trying to deliver, but also think about the strategy and the tactics that you're using as you're engaging and driving that sales process forward.
I'll admit that's my secret. That's my secret sauce and how I figure out my sales techniques is that when I first came into the role as a sales engineer, Rustin, I was in channel. I was selling with channel. And so I knew from the leaderboard which channel reps were good and which were bad. So I thought to myself, emulate those. That is not the right way of those who weren't selling. And I just took notes. I listened. I was a parrot. I repeated. I did exactly what they did. I asked them what I should do. I got their feedback. And then to your point today, I love saving emails that I get. And I'm like, wow, this was really good. This made me open up the email. Like, I really like this landing page. I really like this ad. And so I save them, I screenshot them, I put them in my notebook. Because what better way to learn than, wow, this company's really selling well. And ideally, you're actually taking ideas from products and categories not your own to then bring them into your category and you can differentiate with those ideas. And so I totally get it. I think part of the problem is that a lot of people don't pay attention to those things and aren't listening when during a sales call.
And I think the number one thing is curiosity. Is like they took the call for some reason. You got to discover why. And frankly, for the last 3+ years, I've had these two post-it notes on my monitor of oh, it's going to be blurry, but discover why. And that reminder and that constant reminder of like you're not here to tell them something. You're here to learn from them during that sales process is the most critical thing that I've been able to learn over the time.
We're going to wrap up today, Russ, with this thing that I surprise every guest with, which is called rapid fire. And I just ask you questions that weren't scripted, not even in my brain. I'm going to put that out there to you and that you've got to just kind of tell me top of mind, right? Here's a quick answer to that. All right. Your number one moment in your life that you're most proud of?
Getting married.
Getting married. Oh, good thing is I hope your partner is listening that you should get points for that. Getting married. But why? I'm going to take a script. Why?
Greatest support and change the trajectory of my life. So wonderful partner, very supportive, and probably the most pivotal moment that I've had.
If I found you, Russ, and you in a rare moment where you're not working, and you kids are family, they're out doing something, so it's just you. What are you doing?
Recently, I've been making chainsaw furniture, which sounds a little weird, but I like making things and I like building things. And
Oh, I'm not like a Home Depot chainsaw furniture. Meaning, what does that mean?
it started with kind of more traditional furniture making, and then we had a few very large trees fall on our property, and you can't get lumber like you can off of like dead ash trees. So, uh, got a few chainsaws to harvest and mill the lumber, and then started making furniture out of the fallen trees.
That's very cool. That's not that. That's actually not an answer. Usually I get traveling, sleeping, running. I don't get not even just furniture, chainsaw furniture. Okay. What is your number one wish you have? I know you have children. So what's the number one wish you have for them?
um, yeah, not to be cynical, but I hope they get through college before AI makes it obsolete.
Tell me more about that.
Obviously, the future of education is shifting quickly, and the role of education in our society has dramatically changed even from the time I was young. I still treasure the time I spent in college in terms of what it developed me socially and as a person. And that experience is one I hope my children get to have. But when I look at sort of the educational impact that college had on me, I do think there's probably alternative paths that would get me there just as effectively. But obviously that social piece is something I treasure, and I hope my kids get to share.
Now I understand what you're getting at. Yes, because I listen. I have an 11-year-old that has used software to create in 1 week a full meal delivery site, complete with CRM in the background, etc. I'm like, God, I really don't think he's going to go to college for that. But to your point, he's going to listen to this. I'm going to choose my words. He listens to all my podcasts. But to your point, there's being able to live is a part of what also makes you successful in life as a good communicator, being able to understand social situations, et cetera. So to your point, that is not a replaceable time in life where you're able to make mistakes and not pay the penalties of it.
Absolutely.
So I'm with you on that. Okay. The last rapid fire question here is that what is your number one pet peeve?
Oh my God. When people eat the last snack in the cupboard, but don't throw out the wrapper.
Don't throw out the wrap. That's just messy. That's just
I
dirty.
know. I know. It's absurd. Why would you do that?
But okay, let me just. But if it wasn't the last snack and they didn't throw out the wrapper, is that less annoying to you? Or if there's a whole bag, like let's say there's this Costco size, like I'm imagining like all the different there's a bunch of M&Ms, and so they take not the last one, but there's 4 little bags left, but then they don't throw away the wrapper.
Oh no, the challenge we're dealing with is like, a bag of Tate's cookies, and I open up the cabinet and I think there's a cookie for me, but then I open up the bag and it's empty.
Got it. Oh,
It's the buildup and downfall that really
wow.
kills me.
That's
And
messy. It's
yeah,
you getting an expectation you're going to get a reward, and then just kidding.
exactly. Exactly. It's gone. It's been gone for weeks. I just didn't know.
All right, very good. Well, listen, it's been super fun to chat with you today, Russ. I know you are probably getting ready for a long weekend because you just closed a quarter and probably could use some R&R and some downtime. So I appreciate you giving me today before you hopefully have a wonderful holiday weekend. So if you're listening to this later on, this is July 2nd, recording this right before the 4th. But no, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for giving your time and your brain and your tips to our listeners today.
I hope it's helpful, and appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So those of you guys, if you are listening to this, we love comments. We love direct messages. Send them to Russ and then I know we're happy to receive them. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe so you can see what's coming up for future guests and get other learnings just like Russ gave us today. I appreciate your time and you guys have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.